Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Chinese for Affirmative Action's 2022 Board of Education Candidates Forum. Chinese for Affirmative Action is a 53-year-old civil rights organization advocating for a systemic change that protects immigrant rights, promotes language diversity, and remedies racial and social injustice. 歡迎大家嚟參加我哋今日嘅論壇。如果你需要翻譯咧，就可以撳個地球嗰個掣，就可以有廣東話嘅翻譯。Thank you for taking time out of your busy weekends to join us for this important conversation. My name is Annette Wong, and I am the Director of Programs at CAA, and I will be your moderator. We are excited to have the following co-sponsors for today's event: Chinese Progressive Association, Community Youth Center, and Parents for Public Schools of San Francisco. We also have a program brochure available. If you are able to scan the QR code on your screen, you can follow along for today's agenda and also more information about each of the candidates. The information has also been shared in the chat and is available in Chinese and English. Before we dive in, we have a few housekeeping items to mention. We have Cantonese interpretation available, and to access Cantonese interpretation from your computer, please follow the instructions on the screen. In the following slide, we'll share how to access Cantonese interpretation from a phone or tablet. It's a slight difference, pushing the 3 dots button as opposed to the globe. And throughout the event today, we will be using the Q&A function for audience Q&A. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A icon, and we will take questions in English and in Chinese throughout the event. And towards the end of the event, we will pull a couple questions from the Q&A and we'll present to the candidates for responses. So feel free to use that button. All the registered candidates for 2022 Board of Education have received an invitation to participate in today's forum. And the following candidates were able to join us today: Karen Flushman, Lisa Weissman Ward, Gabriella Lopez, and Elita Fisher. Thank you all for joining us. And here they are. Commissioner Lainey Matamati had intended to join and unfortunately was unable to at the last minute, but we thank her for her regards and her intentions. The focus of our forum this afternoon is improving Black and Chinese student and family relations. The issues facing the world of education have been magnified and exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic: opportunity gaps, school assignment, parental access to information, allocation of school resources, and school safety. And San Francisco is not immune. The societal inequities that we see at large are undoubtedly manifesting in the microcosm of K-12 education right here in our city. In the process of navigating difficult waters, the San Francisco Board of Education has faced several flashpoints that have exposed tensions between Black and Chinese students and families. Unfortunately, these tensions are not new, nor are they unique to San Francisco. And we cannot discuss this without also taking into consideration the direction of this nation as it relates to race and the power and influence of white supremacy. While we may not be able to change the nation with this one election, we hope to hear from our candidates today about how we can improve these relationships, perhaps even heal some wounds, and most importantly, improve learning environments for all students in this wonderful city. So, as we begin, we'll start today's forum with opening remarks. Each candidate will have 1 minute to introduce themselves and outline their top 3 priorities as school board candidates. A couple things to be aware of: there will be interpretation, so please note that even though there's only 1 minute, we ask that folks be concise. And for time, my colleague Annie will show a sign to let you know when time is getting close and when time is up. And she will also flash a sign if you're speaking too quickly for the interpreters. So be on the lookout. She'll also appear on your screen. So we will start in alphabetical order by first name. So we would welcome opening remarks from Ms. Elita Fisher.
Hello, everyone. I'm Elita Fisher, and I'm running because I'm a former foster parent, now an adoptive parent. My 4 kids have attended 8 different USD schools over 17 years, and I've been an active parent at each one. But it was really my journey into getting supports and services for my kids in their schools that turned me from an active parent into parent activist. So I've changed careers. I'm now a special education advocate. I'm a policy wonk and a data nerd. I've spent more than 10 years sitting on district level advisory committees. I've chaired the Community Advisory Committee for Special Education, and I was a founding member of the Joint Advisory Alignment Working Group, where all of the district advisory committees, African American Parent Advisory Council, the District English Learner Advisory Committee, Matua PAC for our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders, and many other PACs, we work together to elevate our common goals and priorities to the Board of Education. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Elita Fisher. Next, we'll have Ms. Gabriella Lopez.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, and thank you so much for that opening. My name is Gabriella Lopez, and I am running once again for a seat on the Board of Education. My background and experience is rooted in education dating back over 13 years. I started off as a para-educator, which helped build the foundation for me to become an effective bilingual teacher in the Mission District in San Francisco. I am proud of the work I have done in public schools and recognize that is because of where I began my career. While working in SFUSD schools, I quickly learned the importance of union work, of arts in the classroom, of being on the school site council, and other ways to represent the district. Formerly elected to the Board of Education, I was a fierce advocate for educators, students, and families, and made sure to elevate the voices, concerns, and priorities of the people who are often left out of these spaces. My top 3 priorities include increasing school funding and resources, improving special education supports, and investing in college prep. I continue to be an advocate in education, and I'm currently working at the University of San Francisco, preparing future educators for this role in teaching. I am passionate and dedicated to this important and critical work and know what it's like to work for our city while serving on the Board of Education. I've learned from that, I've grown from it, and I am ready to continue to advocate.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez. Next, we have Ms. Karen Flushman. Oh, you're muted, Ms. Flushman.
Sorry. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having this very important conversation and for the work that Chinese for Affirmative Action and the partner groups do in the community. I'm Karen Flushman. I'm the mom of 2 SFUSD students, the daughter of a retired educator and a graduate of public schools. I've spent my entire career working in social change, the early part helping immigrants apply for naturalization and people seeking asylum in the United States, and later preparing young adults of color for college, careers, and success in life. Through my work in career access, I became the mentor to many young adults of color as they began corporate careers. And listening to their stories of the racism that they experienced in the workplace led to my current work as a diversity, equity, and inclusion educator, shifting workplace and school culture to be safe and positive for everyone, including at my children's SFUSD school. My top 3 priorities, oh, sorry, I didn't get to my priorities, but I'll bring it up later.
Thank you, Ms. Flushman. And finally, we'll have Commissioner Lisa Weissman-Ward.
Thank you. And echoing the thanks for having us here on this Sunday afternoon for this really important discussion. My name is Lisa Weissman-Ward, and I currently serve on the San Francisco Board of Education. I'm the product of public education. I come from a family of civil rights activists and educators, and I myself am an educator that works in the immigrants' rights space. I am the associate director of the Stanford Law School Immigrants' Rights Clinic, where I wear 2 hats. I teach, I mentor, I supervise law students. We engage in issues around racist, xenophobic immigration systems every single day and talk about how to work in community. And then I do immigration work. I lawyer, I represent individuals facing deportation from the United States. I'm also a mom of 2 SFUSD children. My 3 priorities focus all along restoring trust and repairing harm. And by doing that, I want to do the 3 things, which are centering our students in every decision we make at the district. Number 2, creating a transparent and accessible means by which all of our families can engage. And 3, focusing on fiscal responsibility. Thank you again.
Thank you, Commissioner Weissman Ward. Thank you for all of your opening comments. Very helpful to frame our conversation. We'll dive right in. Our first question is about school community. Recent school board meetings have highlighted the ongoing tensions between Black and Chinese communities, particularly in the aftermath of anti-Black racist statements and heated debates and public comment shrouded in anti-Black sentiments on issues facing the board. The question is, what policies will you advance to support cross-racial community building among students and families? Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond, 1.5 minutes, and we are going to go in reverse order. So we will start with Commissioner Lisa Weissman Ward.
Great, thank you. This is a really important conversation. And the tensions that we've seen, and tensions is probably an understatement, is not new, but it's been continuing to be highlighted in ways that I think are distressing, but also really important because it means we have to be addressing the work. I want to start by saying that the work that we need to do starts in community, which includes at our school sites. A lot of what we've seen in the boardroom at 555 Franklin is adults. And they are modeling the opposite of how we want our students to engage, which is with respect, which is with cultural humility, which is embracing the concepts of allyship, which is embracing and supporting the concepts of anti-racism, anti-xenophobia. And so we need to start our conversations in the classrooms, but then the adults in the room need to take responsibility and be better in terms of how we engage. And I think we do that. I mean, I'm hoping this conversation is going to allow us to dig into that. I can't get all of it out in 90 seconds, but one of the things that I've been really focused on in my work is just how do you have these conversations when folks are coming from sometimes a place of hurt, sometimes a place of ignorance, sometimes a place of just straight up racism. How do you bring folks into a room? Who do you bring into a room to then start engaging? Because right now, we don't have spaces where that conversation is being facilitated in a way that is helpful at all. In fact, I think so far it's been more destructive than helpful. So I want to be able to focus on creating those spaces for dialogue.
Thank you, Commissioner Weissman Ward. Next, we'll have Ms. Karen Flushman.
Yes, last Sunday, Elita and Gabriella and I were at the NAACP San Francisco chapter meeting, and the president, Reverend Amos Brown, asked candidate Honey Mahogany, why is it that San Francisco doesn't love Black people? And it really pierced my heart. You know, so much of what makes San Francisco a great city and very unique in the world is our interracial solidarity. And we have had interracial solidarity, and we also have a long legacy of discrimination and continuing gentrification and racism that is displacing Black and Brown Native San Franciscans. I think we all have a shared stake in creating a San Francisco unified that graduates all students college and career ready. So what I would like to see is organizations like yours and NAACP and the work that I do. I host a weekly live stream, Collect Our Cousins, Engaging White People in the Struggle for Full Democracy. There's Surge. Let's come together and have a real conversation as adults about what racism is, what systemic racism is. How can we heal our relationships as a community so that we can heal our schools and create the kind of environment in our schools that will allow all our students to thrive.
Thank you, Ms. Flushman. Next, we'll have Ms. Gabriella Lopez.
Yes, I do believe that this work starts in the classroom. So when I'm thinking about myself as an educator, educators across the district, a lot of what we are taking on is beginning pre-K and on. There are so many things that we need to instill in young people in order to build that respect, to bridge and begin healing across communities in San Francisco. And I know a lot of that work is happening now. When I was on the school board, we created an initiative that was the Equity Audit. And its purpose was to go across our schools in San Francisco to bring communities together, specifically members of the Chinese community and members of the Black community, to begin to assess what is happening at our schools that we can bring into a space where we're having thoughtful conversations. I recognize that that work is paused after a lot of shifts happen on the school board, but it is an initiative that I do believe will encourage people to come together, people who truthfully wanted to find a space where we can come back, where we can both focus on why we're all here, which is to support our students, to help them feel safe while they are learning in our schools. And that is an effort that I believe has the spirit of what we're all talking about now, which is helping bridge a lot of the harm, helping heal a lot of the harm that's been happening in our schools, and be truthful about what we're seeing.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez. And finally, we'll have Ms. Elita Fisher.
Thank you for this great question. There was a study by the Pew Research back in July of 2020. They released their findings, and what they found during the pandemic was our Asian and our Black Americans that were more likely than any other group to report that they've increased upticks in negative experiences in society because of their race, ethnicity since the coronavirus outbreak. Right. So I think we need to recognize that, you know, we've got harm that's been done to so many communities, and particularly our Black and Asian communities since the pandemic, right? And we need to be working on healing together. And so this is a lot of the work. I mentioned the Joint Advisory Alignment Committee. We formed this group many years ago because we realized the Community Advisory Committee for Special Education, the African American Parent Advisory Council, the District English Learner Advisory Council, the Native American Education Council, everyone was coming to present to the Board of Ed, and we were essentially saying the same things. We all wanted our students to feel welcome. We wanted our students to feel included. We wanted our students to have full access to their educational opportunities. We were all saying the same thing, maybe slightly differently, but we realized when we started to work together, we could really elevate and amplify that. And so now when one group presents, there's others of us at the microphone in public comment, amplifying, sharing the priorities, highlighting it. And I think we need a lot more of that.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Wow, that was a lot to digest in the very first question, but would appreciate all of the candidates' very thoughtful responses. As a reminder, folks can use the Q&A function if you have questions that you would like to potentially ask at the end, and we will see from the lot of questions, present a couple for the candidates to respond to. So feel free to do that at any point during this forum. Our next question is in relation to, it's more of an infrastructure question. So SFUSD believes that students are best served in learning environments that are racially and socioeconomically integrated. To that end, the district uses school choice as a way to help create diverse learning environments and is currently drafting a new elementary school student assignment policy for the 2025-2026 school year. Our question is, what are your plans related to student assignment and combating segregation in schools? Each candidate will again have 90 seconds to respond, and we will start with Ms. Lopez.
Hi, yes. So this is some of the work that I did while I was on the Board of Education, specifically working with the Student Assignment Committee. And I bring that up because the efforts that this was started by was to desegregate our schools. When I started working in SFUSD, that was one thing that kept coming up. Our schools were more segregated than when it was law. And that's an issue of redlining. That's an issue of racism in outside areas that do affect our schools. But the ultimate factor is what we've seen in SFUSD. So while on the student assignment committee, I was overseeing the work our district was doing to create more integrated school environments that have been lacking historically in San Francisco. I fully support the work being done. I know there's a lot of research and efforts that have been made from surrounding research institutions and other supporters who have helped us get to a place that can thoughtfully desegregate our schools, thoughtfully bring communities together, and rethink how families get to choose the schools they want their students to go to. And then we do have to tackle the underlying issue of people who don't want to go to specific schools because of the reputation they have. That culture needs to shift in San Francisco. There's so many really innovative, wonderful programs happening across the school district that as a district, we should be better at highlighting.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez. Next, Commissioner Weissman Ward.
Thank you. Yes, so I am actually currently on the school assignment reassignment committee, and it's an ad hoc committee. It's currently paused in terms of the commissioner's work, but staff are full steam ahead on it. So I'm working with the staff and with our outside experts actually from Stanford, who are working to design geographic-based zones. So the process has two goals. One is to actually allow folks meaningful choice that is within proximity to their homes. Right now, we know that most of our students actually live in the East and Southeast sector and are going west for schools because either the reputation or because there's before and after care programs or because there's language pathways that schools on the East side don't offer as much. So the idea is that we will have these geographic zones there are Stanford demographers working to identify zones so that they will in fact cross-cut different areas. So we will still have we will have integrated schools that reflect race, ethnicity, social income status, language status, but that within each zone, you'll have a handful, for example, of elementary schools that have different options and that there's parity in those options. And that's the key. Ms. Lopez talks about shifting culture. We need to do that. Before we can shift culture, we actually need to make changes. We need to make sure that there is parity within our schools because we know that some of the schools on the East side simply do not have the same resources that schools on the West side do. So it's going to require work and then a culture shift.
Thank you, Commissioner Weissman Ward. Next, Ms. Fisher.
Yeah, thank you. This is a great question. Many of us advisory committees have been involved in the student assignment process since the most recent resolution was passed back in 2018. And we've been asking these same questions for 4 years now, right? I'm a little concerned actually to hear that the work continues without the continued, like the committee included a lot of family voice and a lot of stakeholder voice, a lot of community work. So if that work is only being held by staff, then we're missing out on a whole lot of robust feedback. So I hope that's not the case. But we have a lot of families who are very concerned about their lack of choice, right? Choice is agency, and agency is power for families. So and especially when we've got so many of our student populations that are such a small percentage in the city. Our native Hawaiians and our Pacific Islanders, our Native Americans, Indigenous people, our African Americans. We have such a tiny percentage of those students that we're hearing from families that if they don't get to choose where they get to go, they could end up very racially isolated. And so while and special education, making sure that when we talk about everything we need to do, we're not forgetting about neurodiversity as a diversity as well.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. And finally, Ms. Flushman. Oh, Ms. Flushman, you're on mute.
As I've learned more about the history of SFUSD and realized that this district has had segregated schools from the very beginning, of our history. And there's been times when the NAACP sued, and that caused a consent decree. And for a period of time, the schools started to desegregate. And then that consent decree was modified, and then they started segregating again. And I'm concerned about eliminating agency and choice as we move toward a regional-based model as well. My kids went to one of the most diverse schools in the district, and I can tell you that there also has to be a lot of work with parents in those schools to make sure that the parents are being culturally competent and relating across difference well. That was some of the work that I led in my kids' school, both with the PTA and with the overall school community. How I'm going to work on this is really emphasizing our high schools and making our high schools excellent with college and career access programs and career and technical education and paid summer employment for all young people in the pathway that they are interested in pursuing, individualized learning plans for all young people. I think that bringing our young people together at high school is going to do will be a great step forward to making our schools more diverse and integrated.
Thank you, Ms. Flushman, and all candidates for your responses. Our next question. Multiple studies show the benefits of teachers of color for all students. Teachers also play a key role in facilitating student and family relations. However, in California, 1 in 3 schools don't have any teachers that are Asian American or Pacific Islander, and more than half of schools in California don't have any Black teachers. Furthermore, school districts across the country are facing teacher shortages, and SFUSD is no exception. On the first day of school, there were 100 certified vacancies and over 150 paraeducator vacancies at school sites across SFUSD. The question is, what is your plan to recruit and retain teachers of color at SFUSD? Candidates will have 90 seconds to respond, and we will begin with Ms. Flushman.
I think the way to retain and recruit teachers of color is to make SFUSD the most desirable place in the country to teach for teachers of color, and to first of all fix our payment challenges, our benefits challenges, the whole empower mess, and to build more housing for educators so that they can afford to live here, and then to partner with City College, San Francisco State, USF, so that we can offer credentialing programs so that we can recruit, retain, and what do educators of color, what will they enjoy here in San Francisco? The fact that we can be open, the fact that we can teach ethnic studies, that we are the originator of ethnic studies, that we've been saying gay since the 1990s, that we, in the midst of this attack on public education across the country, hold tight to our values as San Francisco, as being a safe community, freedom for everybody, and where we teach the authentic history of our country, because we know that young people can handle it. Young people need to know the authentic history of our country. And we need to get this right in San Francisco so we can be that beacon across the country to other districts about how to have schools that are not only friendly to students of color, but also to LGBTQ and trans students. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Flushman. Next, Ms. Fisher.
I'll build on what Ms. Flushman said. You know, our teachers have to feel safe and supported and welcome and loved and respected and wanted in our schools. And so absolutely fixing Empower. Ms. Flushman said at a forum Friday, you know, why don't we have a website, you know, that our teachers can refer to see the status of Empower so they can, you know, at least have the information to know if things aren't right, you know, where can they go instead of a ticket that's not being responded to, right? I've said we should have presentations at every single board meeting until that's fixed. So that should be job number 1. Also, we've got some great pathway programs for our teachers. Our para to teacher pathway program, we should expand that. I have always said that our paraeducators are the backbone of our schools and our most underappreciated resource, and they don't work for full work days. You know, paras should have more hours. We should have more paras. To support our teachers of color, we need to make them feel welcome in our schools. Right now, we don't. We need to make sure that, you know, we're culturally humble, right, and that we're celebrating everyone's diversity. And I think that a big part of that starts with making sure that we're not further isolating and marginalizing. You know, we don't have zero tolerance policies, for example, against the N-word and hate speech and discrimination in our schools. And we absolutely need more policies to make sure that everyone feels safe and supported and wants to stay in the district.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Commissioner Weissman-Ward.
Thank you. I think this is a really, really important question. As someone who grew up in many different areas, including Florida, upstate New York, and North Carolina, being biracial in any of those spaces looked very different. And so, believe it or not, in Syracuse, New York, there was a lot of biracial, the biracial population, and I'm talking specifically African-American and white, was quite high. And so I felt like I saw people that looked like me. In other places, not as much. And I know from firsthand experience that representation matters. I know from being at the law school and working, I work with 2 other colleagues that are women of color, and we know what it means to our students to have professors and instructors and teachers that look like them and that have lived experiences that may be similar. And so representation matters. I think a couple things that we need to do to be able to recruit our educators is we need to pay more. We need to pay, full stop, period. We need to pay. We need to pay more. Good news is that it looks like we're going to be moving to a 6% raise across the board for all of our teachers. I agree with Karen. We need more affordable housing that's specific for teachers. We've just broken ground on one site, which is hopefully the beginning of many. And then I think probably the biggest issue is we need better working conditions. We need better working conditions for all of our teachers. And that looks like not just our educators, but what are our site leaders doing? Because we have heard that our educators really rely on assistant principals and principals for creating a culture of care, for creating a culture of learning and support. And so not only looking at what are our demographics for educators, but what do our site leaders look like as well?
Thank you, Commissioner Weissman-Ward. Ms. Lopez.
Why I appreciate these forums is because I can say I agree with what's been said and continue to build on it. I am that educator that went into this work because I wanted to be who their students saw in this space. I wanted to be a representative of that. Given my experience in public schools, it was something I saw throughout. No teacher that I had could communicate with my family, could speak their language. And it was why I entered the profession. I've been a paraeducator, I've been a public school teacher, so I recognize also the intensity of our work and trying to survive in San Francisco. So this issue of pay, of course, is number one. I know that the 6% increase is just the beginning, as negotiations will begin again in the spring. One thing that I do now as a teacher educator working at the University of San Francisco is helping our future teachers take advantage of the switches that have happened at the state level. As you become a teacher in California, it is one of the most prepared states of educators, but that includes numerous examinations, numerous barriers in many ways to have to pay for those fees. All of that has now changed, where teachers can take advantage of coursework they took previously to meet the requirements needed to understand the subject matter and to become an educator. And we're seeing that change has now increased the number of teachers of color who could benefit. As someone who had gone through that process, it was a barrier for me. And it meant more cost to becoming a teacher and more stress and time, which often means we want to exit before entering the profession. So taking advantage of that, I've helped with the district as well.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez, and all candidates for your responses. A quick reminder that folks can use the Q&A function to ask questions. We have a few questions that have been submitted. If you're directing your question to a specific candidate, we will ensure that all candidates have the opportunity to respond at the end. But feel free to continue to put questions in the Q&A function. Thank you. Our next question is around access to multilingual education. So SFUSD provides language programs in 9 languages at elementary schools across the district. However, not all students have equal access to these programs, resulting in resources and opportunities becoming segregated. How will you provide all students the opportunity to receive a multilingual education? Each candidate has 90 seconds to respond, and we'll start with Ms. Fisher.
This is a great question. Thank you so much. We need to expand our multilingual pathways. I had a conversation about with some folks from Tenderloin Community School 2 weeks ago about some of the Vietnamese pathway options that they have there. And one of the challenges they're struggling with is, and I think many families and many pathways struggle with throughout, if a pathway starts in elementary school, biliteracy, immersion, whatever the case may be, very often your options are limited for middle school and high school, right? We don't have that full continuum of pathways, in early ed, elementary school. It's great that we've got our elective wheel in middle school, but we've got a lot of kids who would really, really like to continue their language pathway. So how do we continue that? More classes at more schools? We learned about asynchronous classes during the pandemic. Could we potentially, even we might not be able to offer Vietnamese as a pathway at all of our middle schools, for example, but could there be one period with a teacher at one school that's offered via Zoom to everyone else? Does everyone who wants that Vietnamese pathway have to go to the same middle school? Anyway, so many different things that we need to be thinking about when it comes to language pathways. What we've heard through our stakeholder engagement with the LCAP task force, which is all about budget and accountability oversight, is families also want access to after-school tutoring. Families themselves want language opportunities. Very often families can't help their kids with their homework at home. So making sure that, there are culturally competent tutors, multilingual folks at the school sites after school to help kids with homework is critically important as well.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Ms. Lopez.
This is something that's really near and dear to my heart as a bilingual student myself. It was initiatives that I supported while on the board, specifically expanding Arabic and Vietnamese language pathways. But I want to build on the work that we're doing in the district and include our families in that. When I was on the board, I surveyed the district, and there are over 70 languages spoken in our school district. And part of what I know is important is with what we're doing to support our students, our families need to be a part of that process. And if language is a barrier, as a city that is connected to so many resources, so many institutions, so many programs that could support with language accessibility, that could be something we certainly can take advantage of. I recognize that the pandemic stalled a lot of the work that we are proposing. It's now impacting the members that we have in the schools to even take this on. But I know that many of our nonprofits have a direct connection with schools, people who can communicate and have already built strong, positive relationships with our families that can be part of this work as well, can also expand the numbers of work opportunities we offer to community members across San Francisco to help fill the gap of what we've already said we support and want to implement in our schools. But certainly there are many areas that with the language pathways we need to improve on.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez. Next, Commissioner Weissman-Ward.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'll start out by sort of tying this back into the earlier question about the elementary school reassignment design process that we're engaged in. And we're looking at making sure that schools can be more integrated and that folks have meaningful choice, because choice, if it doesn't mean anything, doesn't mean anything. And it's just performative and superficial. So actual choice that allows things like language pathways. And so that means building more language pathways that means creating more options. I think I agree with Elita's really important note that we then need to make sure it continues. So my kids are in the Japanese language program right now. And my son, who's getting ready to go to middle school, is like, well, I have to go to Presidio because that's where they have Japanese. And I live in the Mission District. I live in the Mission, like that is far across town. I'm not sure how we're going to do that as two working parents with another little one that is not at that school. So those language pathways and them being able to continue is really, really important. I appreciate the idea of thinking about how can we perhaps connect with, how can we be creative and looking to expand options. I want to be mindful that we want to be creative, but also pragmatic. Like we have a lot of really, really, really important crises that we're dealing with. And so maybe it's connecting through city college opportunities, which there's already those connections there. Maybe it is looking ways for folks to get on Zoom. I don't want to get ahead of myself there though, because I think we have to be pragmatic, and we also have to make sure that the need and desire is there. We know that it looked like for the Longfellow program was going to be capped, but thanks to our new superintendent, we were able to avoid that. But making sure that we highlight the programs that are there to make sure folks stay interested is important.
Thank you, Commissioner Weissman Ward. Ms. Flushman. Oh, Ms. Flushman, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm just going to leave myself unmuted, so I stopped doing that. I agree with what my colleagues have put forward. You know, my children as well are in the language pathway, and it's been an incredible learning experience for them. And I want all children to have access to learning pathways, both in elementary school and then to continue on through middle school and high school. As a global city with so many different languages spoken and so many different resources available, I agree with Ms. Fisher that we need to figure out how we can bring these resources into our schools in a creative way to sustain language pathways all the way through. I also think having strong language pathways is a great way to get more families to opt into sending their children to SFUSD schools, which is going to increase our enrollment and increase our finances. In my own family, it's not only the language, but it's also the cultural celebrations. And it was so beautiful to see their very diverse school engaging in all these cultural celebrations and really learning about different cultures at a very early age. And again, I want to see that opportunity available to more students. When you think about if we have regions for elementary school assignment, but there's not going to be language pathways available in all those regions, that's really going to hamper some of these smaller programs, such as the Japanese bilingual bicultural program, which is only offered at 2 public elementary schools. So how are we going to make sure that folks can still participate in meaningful numbers? Because we need the parent volunteers are the backbone of that program, and you can't really have it if it's fragmented at too many different schools. You're not going to have the core community that you need to make the program strong. But again, this is, oh, sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Flushman. All right. Our next question is also related to access to certain types of classes and curriculum. Last year, California approved a new requirement for all high school students to complete 1 semester in ethnic studies before graduation. Ethnic studies include studying the history, stories, and key issues affecting communities of color, such as anti-Black and anti-Asian racism. How will you ensure effective ethnic studies implementation throughout SFUSD? Candidates will have 90 seconds to respond, and we'll start with Ms. Lopez.
Yes, this is another thing that I'm just so proud of our district of implementing. And one of the highlights that I want to elevate, because in San Francisco, we really are where it begins across the state and then across the country. So in 2010, having the Board of Education pass this initiative, we saw through research the number of students who benefited from taking an ethnic studies class who had a lower GPA in 8th grade and went on to have better attendance, to better perform in high school, which of course we know leads to more outcomes in higher education and in life in general. So just understanding the importance of this course and what it does for students to see their own histories themselves in their curriculum and have educators who were in San Francisco building a curriculum that was designed for them. While I was on the board, having seen this work across 10 years, we know it wasn't implemented fully. And we know there's still educators who we need to put in this space in order to deliver that. One of the initiatives that I led was the Latinx Resolution. And what that created for some of our Latino students was ethnic studies in English language development. So it ties in the understanding and importance of English language and the instruction of that with ethnic studies, which we know has multiple benefits for our students.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez. Ms. Flushman?
I'm actually experiencing what candidate Lopez is talking about. My daughter is in 9th grade and she's in ethnic studies, and she's also in her English class. They're reading literature that was selected by Native Americans to complement what is going on in the ethnic studies classroom. And those are my daughter's 2 favorite classes. She came home so excited. She's like, Mom, I'm learning critical race theory. And I see exactly what it's doing for her as a biracial young woman in developing her identity, in developing solidarity with her classmates. And you know, as a white woman who is very opposed to racism, I believe that ethnic studies is beneficial for students who identify as European American as well, because it helps us to understand how to be in solidarity and how to be a really strong ally with other communities. You don't fight racism with racism, you fight racism with solidarity, as Bobby Seale taught us. So I will strongly support ethnic studies, expanding it throughout into elementary all the way up. And also we're supposed to be studying LGBTQ history as part of our history curriculum. And that's also going to be a big priority of mine, making sure that we're learning LGBTQ history.
Thank you, Ms. Flushman. Commissioner Weissman Ward.
Thank you. I am a big fan, big proponent of ethnic studies. Ms. Lopez referenced studies that are saying this is actually improving the insights in education and well-being of our children. That's right. Stanford published a study just about a year ago. I think that's probably the one that you were referencing. And it talks about these, its quote is remarkably prolonged and strong positive impact on students. So I don't think that there's actually like meaningful fight over whether it's good for our students or not. So I think the question is, how do we engage more? How do we make sure that our educators feel supported and ready to teach this really important and sometimes challenging topics? I think to the points that Ms. Fisher and Ms. Flushman have made about the intersectionality of issues. I mean, in my work at Stanford, I can't talk about immigration without talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act. I can't teach immigration without talking about how if you are Black or brown, you are more likely to be profiled, which means you are more likely to be stopped by the police, which means if you are not a US citizen, you are more likely to end up in deportation proceedings. So there is intersectionality in all of this. And I think ethnic studies really allows us to engage and have these conversations in a way that is insightful and educational, and I think not putting folks like on the defensive, because I think when folks feel like they're on the defensive, they shut down. So really making sure that there's a space created so that we can educate and teach and move forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Weissman Ward. Ms. Fisher.
Yeah, I love going last. I can build on, everything what everyone else just said. I love the way this question was framed from the standpoint of implementation, right? Because I think that is actually San Francisco Unified's biggest struggle. We've got a lot of great policies, we've got great procedures, we've got great ideas, great vision, values. How do we actually trickle that down to the classroom, right? Which is where the focus needs to be. So when it comes to ethnic studies, as Commissioner Weissman Ward said, training, our teachers need co-planning time. I think it was Ms. Flushman who said earlier, you know, the majority of our teachers are actually white in our school district. So I think that we need to have a little extra training for some professional development, ongoing professional development, you know, learning communities for our educators as well as for our students and our families. Our families should be invited into the community celebrations and things like that as well, right? I'd like to take it a step further as well. There's been a lot of work done in the district around arts integration over the past couple of years and developing a curriculum math for kindergarten through 12th grade arts education and making sure that the arts that we provide are more culturally relevant. And you shouldn't have to be in an ethnic studies class to learn about other cultures. Our social studies curriculum is long overdue for an overhaul. It's very exclusive and very discriminatory. So ethnic studies and so much more.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. All right, take a couple seconds to breathe here. We're actually going to start to move into the audience Q&A. And so we've had several submissions from the audience and folks can continue to submit questions. We'll hopefully get a couple questions in here from the audience. But the first one that we have is for all candidates. How would you address the issue of how multiple generations of Black students are funneled into the school to prison pipeline? What actions or plans for urban families are you taking towards the June 2023 Senate Bill 823, which aims to close the Division of Juvenile Justice in California? So that was a lot to digest. Each candidate will get 90 seconds to respond. And we will start with Commissioner Weissman Ward.
Thank you so much. So yeah, my work in the immigrants' rights space is very, very closely tied to the criminal legal system. And we know how fraught and how racist and how xenophobic this system is. The idea that that we have juveniles who are in fact kids that are facing the threat of school to prison pipeline is incredibly, incredibly problematic, and these systems need to be dismantled. I'm looking for the question so I can make sure I get all of it. But one of the things I think we need to do is we know that there's this phenomenal, brilliant social scientist out of Stanford, Jennifer Eberhardt, that talks about how bias impacts our schools, lots of systems, but including schools. And she does this analysis of when there's a white child who engages in behavior X and a Black child that engages in that same behavior. And actually the first time, the response from teachers is usually the same. But when there's a second or subsequent time, the response you see all of a sudden goes from here to here, and it is very disparate. So a lot of this has to do with how are our educators engaging with our students? What is their responses to our students, depending on the color of the skin, depending on their language, depending on their socioeconomic status. And I think that we need to really engage with our educators in terms of these anti-bias systems and anti-bias learning. We need to make sure that we are not engaging with law enforcement from a school perspective when we have kids that we're talking about. That's just not the right forum. I could go on and on and on, but I don't think law enforcement belongs in our schools.
Thank you, Commissioner Weissman Ward. Ms. Flushman.
So we know what the studies tell us, that 79% of teachers nationally are white, and that white teachers disproportionately punish Black and brown students and infantilize white girls and adultify Black girls, and that it's these incidents of punishment that cause students to not feel welcome or that they belong at the school. And Black and brown students, also Native students, are much more likely than their white and Asian counterparts to report that they don't have a caring adult at the school who they feel that they can identify with. So I think it's really important that we shift the culture in our schools, as we were talking about earlier, not helping educators develop the cultural competence and to unlearn their conditioning to overly punish Black and Brown students, having restorative practices and keeping students in school. We know that students who are pushed out of school, they don't drop out, they're pushed out of school, or students who are expelled from school, they are twice as likely to wind up in the juvenile justice system, and then that becomes the school to prison pipeline. I also think as someone who has worked for 20 years preparing young people for success in careers and college, that having an individualized learning plan from 9th grade all the way through 12th grade with paid summer employment is going to be a huge incentive to retain and graduate students who are college and career ready.
Thank you, Ms. Flushman. Ms. Fisher?
Thank you for this question. This is the work I do as a special education advocate, because the school to prison pipeline flows right through special education, either over identification of our Black and Brown kids for disability categories like other health impairment or emotional disturbance, or under identification in the areas of learning disability. So I've sat for more than 5 years on our comprehensive coordinated early intervening committee. And that is where we look at why our Black kids are getting over suspended. We dig into root causes. And because this is such a huge issue in San Francisco Unified, we're actually sanctioned by the state as significantly disproportionate. So I think it's important to recognize that behavior is a form of communication. When we've got kids, as Ms. Flushman said, who are being pushed out of the classroom, the behavior very often is what we address, or defiance or things like that. But that's coming from a place of their needs not being met, their academic needs not being met. The way I would start to address this is with a more robust reading curriculum. We really need to fundamentally shift the way we teach reading in our district. Less than half of our students are proficient readers because we're not teaching all the components of reading at the foundation level the way we need to. And so that's the work I'm doing right now with curriculum and instruction, the African American Parent Advisory Council, and many teachers and school psychologists and others. So
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Ms. Lopez?
I'll just also add their creative needs not being met. So I think there's a lot of areas where educators need that space to add creativity and engagement and fun in the learning that students are having in their schools, to make it a place they want to go to, they want to feel good in, they want to feel respected in. I think this is a great question of how local school districts should and can take advantage of initiatives that are happening at the state level and take advantage of block grant programs that are supporting shifts in our schooling system with populations that I will say are targeted. People have said this already, but I do think policing in schools is something that needs to be addressed, and something that San Francisco Unified specifically is ahead of, given we don't have a strong relationship with the police department in that way. But there have been many incidents where the police are called in our elementary schools. And what does that mean? What does that signal for our students? So helping school sites understand, helping educators understand that direct connection with law enforcement is the beginning of this pipeline, and can set the tone for that school and for that student if we continue to go down that path. We also need to look at what educators are seeing as disciplinary action and who's overseeing that. If you are kicking a student out of your class repeatedly, there's an underlying issue that needs to be resolved instead of this practice that is continuing.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez, and all candidates for your responses. Our next question from the audience: how do you propose that Black and Brown parents and non-English speaking parents give input on curriculum, policies, and school choice when committees have been put on pause indefinitely, what strategies will you promote to support family input in the future, especially for historically marginalized communities? Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond, and we will start with Ms. Fisher.
Yay. Shameless plug there for the parent advisory committees. We've got an African American Parent Advisory Council, a Community Advisory Committee for Special Education, a District English Language Advisory Committee, and all of the and many, many more. I mentioned the Mantua PAC, Indian Ed, Migrant Ed. There's a lot of different PACs, and we're forming a QT PAC. Hopefully that'll be off the ground this year, right? That resolution passed. So yay, for our queer and trans families as well. We report to the Board of Education a couple of times a year. We all meet monthly. We invite district level personnel in to join us for our meetings and report and present. And then at the end of the year, we all present to the Board of Ed together. And as I mentioned earlier, on surrounding our LCAP priorities, and we work together to uplift what the district is doing well and try to bring some transparency and shine some light in areas where improvements are needed. I think our biggest struggle, though, over the past couple of years, honestly, is there's a lot of free parent and family labor that's going into doing this work around accountability and transparency. And very often the district responses to our requests, frankly, feels like gaslighting. And so getting real response, this is part of the implementation, right? Making sure that we get real responses and the district actually takes what we say seriously. Parents are our teachers first students, right? So making sure that our feedback is taken seriously and used to drive change can be really impactful when it happens, and more needs to happen.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Ms. Lopez?
This is my area. This is my jam. When I was on the school board, and even before as an educator, as a teacher, my focus is how I bring in the people who are impacted by my choices. We have a structure. We have a setup that is very inaccessible. There are language barriers. There are family barriers. There are so many things that prevent people from connecting with the school district personnel. I see that the committees being on pause just increases the fact that there are less opportunities for people to engage with decision makers. But even if that were in place, we also need to be in the community. So what I would do as a commissioner is bring what we're doing at the school board level to the communities or whoever wanted to engage with school board members. Here is a place where you can talk more, where we can actually respond to you without, without affecting the Brown Act, but it just became a more personal way to build relationships with decision makers and to help people firmly understand our processes, to help people give me ideas, to help their voice be a part of this work. So continuing that and making it language accessible, providing childcare, making it easy to get to through public transportation, or again, in the space where people often meet. That's what I do. That's what I continue to do today, and is how we can advance by working together.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez. Commissioner Weissman-Ward.
Hi, okay, so I'm going to respectfully disagree with something that Commissioner Lopez said about taking away opportunities for folks to engage. And the reason is, I actually don't think right now that the way that the committees are set up, I mean, this is to your point, Ms. Fisher, that it's actually not allowing for real engagement. The folks come to the board meeting and we can't speak back because of Brown rules. We have to be in listening mode only. It doesn't feel like things are being received. And it is, I don't actually think that these committees are allowing as much of the voice that we need at the table. So I would agree though 100% with Ms. Lopez's statement that we need to do more. We can't expect folks to come to the boardroom. It's exclusionary and doesn't allow for the conversation. We need to be in community. I am thrilled that we are in the process of, we are doing 20 different community engagement sessions at different schools all around the district, 20 plus. We're also doing these engagement sessions via Zoom for whom folks that is more accessible. To be clear, this isn't the end. This is the start. This is the first time the district has done anything like this, and we are going to continue to engage. This is focused specifically on our governance process and thinking about our goals and values to make sure they're in alignment with community. But this is how we start. And I think that we need to make sure that we have scaffolding in place, that we have process in place so that we can go into community, we can set more tables, we can make sure that whatever we're doing is comfortable in a space that feels culturally responsive to folks that we're engaged with.
Thank you, Commissioner Weissman Ward. Ms. Flushman?
I firmly believe that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution and often furthest away from the authority and resources to make decisions about problems. So I believe the role of the board is to go to the folks who are most impacted by our decisions and surface the solutions that they want to see happen, and then scale those solutions up across the district. I also believe that in a city as diverse as San Francisco, we have to be cognizant that each different community has its own organizational structure, its own language, its own way of doing things, and we have to be respectful and not create a cookie cutter approach that's one size fits all. You have to customize and tailor the way you approach each community. That's something that I learned helping immigrants become citizens of the United States. They all had to go through the same process, but the way we engaged in Filipino communities was not the same way that we engaged in African communities, was not the same way that we engaged with other groups. So really building those relationships so that people do feel included and that they didn't have to seek it out. We came to them and said, we want you to be part of this. We know your children's education is very important for you. And we want you to know this is what the Board of Education is. This is what we do.
Thank you, Ms. Flushman, and all of the candidates for your responses. We have time for one more question from the audience, and then we will move on to closing comments. Time has really moved quickly with, with our forum this afternoon. So for the final question, and you all have mentioned a little bit of this, so this is a little bit of stemming from comments that you all have made as candidates in this forum, and also some questions that have come from the audience. But communities have spoken, and initiatives like the Latinx Resolution, the QT PAC, the Equity Audit, and Action Planning Committee were all passed, but they are all on hold, as you all have mentioned. How does the board move forward and gain trust from the community when previous efforts to have their voices heard of the most vulnerable seem to have fallen on deaf ears? How do these efforts not get lost and stay on track in spite of turnover among Board of Education members? Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond, and we will start with Ms. Flushman.
Yeah, this is going to be top on my priorities. I'm very grateful to have been endorsed by Latinx Democratic Club and grateful to be endorsed by Harvey Milk and the Bay Area Reporter, as well as Juanita Moore. So making sure that those parent advisory committees are not put on hold, that they are brought in and established and survive my tenure on the Board of Education is going to be very, very important to me. And just maintaining accountability to community as well. You know, I as I mentioned before, I don't consider myself the expert. I consider myself humble, a listener, a bridge builder, and someone who's going to engage the actual experts who are the people who are directly impacted by my decisions. And then building consensus around, okay, we need to decide this in this way because it's going to impact this particular community in this way, and helping communities to also understand each other. I'm so grateful for the conversation that we're having here today, because this is exactly what we need to build: a multiracial, multi-sexuality, coalition that wants to see the best for all SFUSD students and understands that within that, we have to consider the particular needs of different groups. That's what I'm committed to bringing to the board.
Thank you, Ms. Flushman. Ms. Fisher?
I really appreciate this question. This is one that I could have written. I feel like I've been asking it a lot lately. Because this is those of us who have been involved in working with the board and district leadership for a while feel this, in our hearts. Over the past decade that I've been involved in district level advisory committees, we've had parent advisories who have done stakeholder engagement. LCAP task force has done it, the attendance working group, many, many, many others. So we have a huge amount of data already that we could pull from. When I was involved in the attendance working group, actually, I was the only non-district employee on that group. It was folks from every department. We met for 5 months to get to the root causes of chronic absenteeism. And the process we used, we went out into, it ended up being more than 50 different communities. And we asked, what were your biggest fears? What are your biggest hopes? And what are your suggestions to getting there? And invariably, every single one with the biggest fears was that we're going to take the time to do this. Everyone answered this question the same way. We're going to take all this time to do this. And then nothing's going to be done with this data. Nothing will change. And here we are years later, right? So I feel like we keep going through this process over and over and over again. And with all due respect to the new board, you've got to start somewhere, but I feel like we're doing it again. I think we really need to do our due diligence and our homework and go back over the past couple of years and really learn what families and stakeholders have been saying over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And instead of hiring more consultants, let's do our research and go figure out what families want and build on that.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Ms. Lopez?
Yeah, this is primarily why I have the concern of pausing the committees, of pausing the initiatives that have been created, because these are public meetings that allow for information to be recorded and information to be accessed years later. So this is really valuable and important data. It's not the space often where we get the most work done or it is productive, but if there's an opportunity for our families to engage with the board and for their messages to be recorded, that has to be implemented. That is why we're here to serve. While I was on the board, I spearheaded the Latinx Resolution and the Equity Audit with communities who worked closely together to bring this to the public. And it was a thoughtful, engaging process that we wanted to see implemented throughout. Again, I recognize the pandemic stalled a lot of that work. I know that this is really valuable information and pieces of and initiatives that people want to see happen, but fully pausing them is just an example of how we're signaling that we don't want to engage with folks. And I know that that's something that we want to build on. So building the trust is what we're here to do. It's why we're running in this race. And heading back into a space that has been harmed. The school district has gone through a lot during this time. And I think we're all ready to begin rebuilding those relationships with our families who actually started a lot of these initiatives.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez. Commissioner Weissman Ward?
Yeah, I think this question is a really, really important one. And I think that the question about how, when families are talking to one another and talking to us, when communities are talking to us at the board, how do they feel heard? And I guess my concern is, I don't think that the committees is how folks are feeling heard. And so I agree 100%. We need to make sure our communities, our families are feeling heard. And it is the work of the board and the superintendent to say, how do we do that in a meaningful way? So it's not stop committees and throw everything out the window and no, we don't want to hear, but it's like, can we do better? So Elita, to your point, can we do better? Can we make sure that we're actually listening and not just saying things and nothing gets done? Because that seems just as offensive as not creating space at all, to pretend to create space and do nothing about it. So I think that's where sort of my perspective is looking at, how do we create better space? How do we create more space? How do we create more meaningful space? I am thrilled that with the new superintendent, I get emails every day about everything and anything under the sun. And I am watching our superintendent, the head of the school district, respond to every single one of those questions. And if he's not someone from staff is. And so I think that is also how we're starting to change the shift. I'll also say, though, that there are probably 95% of our parents are not emailing the district, and we cannot forget about those. Just because someone is at the microphone does not mean that they are representing the entire community. So we need to be in community, making sure we're hearing from all.
Thank you, Commissioner Weissman Ward. All right, well, that rounds out our audience Q&A. Thank you to the audience members for submitting questions and engaging with the candidates. And thank you, candidates, for your thoughtful responses. We're coming towards the end of today's forum, and we want to end with closing remarks. We've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about tensions between Black and Chinese communities and anti-Black sentiment at board meetings. We've talked about school assignment, multilingual education, ethnic studies, recruitment and retention of teachers of color, the school to prison pipeline, and parent engagement, particularly for parents from historically marginalized communities. Thinking about all of this, we're hopeful that each candidate can provide 2 minutes of closing comments to share final thoughts. And we will start, sorry, the slide says 1 minute, but we're going with 2 minutes. We will start with Commissioner Weissman Ward.
Thank you. I was starting to do the mental adjustments about how much time. Okay. Thank you all so much for allowing us to be here again. I think these conversations and the theme of this forum is critically important to moving forward, not only in our schools, but in our community at large. I've spent the last 16 years challenging an awful, inhumane, and inequitable immigration system. I have the stamina, the wherewithal, the commitment to working alongside of communities to help improve the lives of others. Over the last nearly 10 years of teaching at the law school, I tell my students, be careful when you're holding a hammer, everything around you looks like a nail. And this is a reminder to me that not everything is a knockdown, drag out fight. And some of the most effective change is a result of consensus building. After having many conversations with parents, what is clear is like we all want what is best for our own kids. And so that shift has to be what I want for my own kids, I need to want for your kids too. And that is the shift that all of us need to have. When we start our conversations from a place of commonality, rather than a place of difference, we are more likely to successfully get to the place that we want at the end. And even if it's not 100% agreement, there's at least going to be a higher level of mutual understanding and respect for one another. As a parent, I've learned how incredible and brilliant and kind and caring and unique and quirky and insecure and sometimes secure, the adjectives go on and on. I've learned about how all of these adjectives for our kids. And I believe that each and every one of our students has the ability to learn and meet their fullest potential. And it's the role of the board to support our district and our educators so that we can make sure that we can provide these opportunities for our students. And I hope to bring my skill set of consensus building and negotiation and just being thoughtful and kind and decent with a moral compass that's going to get us to where we need to be. So thank you all again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Commissioner Weissman Ward. Ms. Flushman?
I believe deep in my heart that all families and all students love learning, and it is the role and responsibility of SFUSD board members to make sure SFUSD loves them back. And that's exactly what I will do on the Board of Education. I will promote investment in our students and educators' social, emotional well-being and academics. I will provide budget transparency and accountability, and I will promote collaborative decision-making. Just as we've been talking about today, we can bring communities together around our shared interest in every single one of our SFUSD students developing to their full potential. And that means universal pre-K, getting them all students assessed for learning differences early on, providing high intensity, culturally competent tutoring to young people who are experiencing challenges with literacy, getting them all reading at grade levels so that they can advance into middle school ready and advance into high school ready. And then through an individualized learning plan, really uncover what they're good at, what they're curious about, what kind of career or college they would like to go to, and provide them with the skills, knowledge, experience, and networks that they need to have so that they graduate college or career ready and go on and succeed and fully contribute to San Francisco. We have one of the most robust labor markets in the entire country. And we need, right now, we're only graduating 6 out of 10 of our students college and career ready. And this is a huge problem for our city. It leads to further gentrification, displacement, and our schools play a fundamental role in shifting all that. Thank you so much for listening, and I appreciate this time together.
Thank you, Ms. Flushman. Ms. Fisher?
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to be here and have this great conversation. The indomitable Ruth Bader Ginsburg, one of my favorite quotes by her was, "Fight for what you believe in, but do it in a way that makes others want to join you." And that, whether it be my work as a leader of a parent advisory committee, a parent fighting for supports and services for my own kids in school, or a special education advocate who sits with families in meetings day after day, school after school, I think that's critically important to remember, is that we all want the same thing. We all want strong public schools that help each and every child meet their full potential and thrive. Schools as a public safety net that helps each and every student achieve more than their family had. I want my kids to have greater wealth than I have. And I think schools should and can be the launching point for that. My dad jokes that he votes to cancel my mom out because he's a Republican and she's a Democrat. They've been married for more than 50 years. And I'd like to think they raised 3 pretty strong, successful children. But that has proven to me that you don't have to agree on everything. You know, in fact, politically, you can disagree. And you can still be part of a functioning, healthy, happy unit / society. And that's the work that I do every day and the work I want to continue to do on the board. I'm doing that work and trying to build consensus around reading and reading instruction in our district now. Been doing that work for a decade. I want to continue to do that around social emotional supports, bringing more programs and resources into gen ed so we refer less students out to special ed, and in so many other ways. And so I look forward to working with all of you, not just here today, but beyond. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Ms. Lopez?
Yes, thank you everyone for the conversation, for an opportunity to bring us into this space. I just want to end with saying I feel I have a moral responsibility to represent all students, especially low-income immigrant students who, like me, consistently face barriers when advocating for a quality education. It is why when I was called to run again, I did it. I am a lifelong educator and learner. I have served as a classroom teacher, prison educator, former school board president, and currently as an adjunct professor. My experience ranges from early childhood education to graduate level, and this will inspire and inform my work on the Board of Education. I believe that our public schools can and should and will uplift all of our students. And I constantly put the needs of students and families at the center, as I did my own classroom. So as a teacher educator, I am actively preparing and supporting a new generation of educators to come into our schools as prepared as possible to help generate the outcomes we want for our students. I want to wrap up by speaking a little on what the work that I did when I was during the COVID pandemic. I worked to ensure our city's children were fed and had the technology they needed to continue their learning while we reopened schools when it was safe to do so. Every day I was on the ground with our families, with our students, offering school supplies, offering tech workshops for families who are now using our tech platforms to support learning at home. I advocated for students and families who live in SROs, especially while navigating virtual learning. I heard from many parents and families about the fear they were living through while trying to personally work and teach, and that's what drove my work. I I put our children's education and well-being at the forefront, and that should be the district's top priority.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez, and thank you all candidates for your time today, for taking time out of your weekend to attend this forum and to share your thoughtful responses to all of our questions. This concludes our forum. And we also just wanted to apologize. We realized that in the course of the forum that there were some emojis that were popping up, and we just wanted to share that we had intended to disable that, but had not done it in advance. So we apologize in advance for that. But we did want to thank you for your participation. And before we wrap things up, we had a few announcements for folks. Election day is Tuesday, November 8th. So please remember to register and vote. And CAA will be having an in-person community service day on Thursday, October 13th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the CAA office. If there are immigrant non-citizen parents who are interested in voting in this year's Board of Education election, please reach out for that day or any other time. Feel free to call the CAA office, and we are happy to answer any questions about immigrant parent voting in school board elections. The next announcement is that there will be some Chinatown-based voter engagement events led by Chinese Progressive Association, one of the co-sponsors of today's forum. There are 3 events listed: Thursday, October 6th, Friday, October 7th, and Wednesday, October 12th, all related to different propositions that are on the ballot. If folks have more questions, feel free to contact Tiffany Ng at CPA. And that concludes our event. If folks would like to continue following us, feel free to check out these QR codes on your screen. Otherwise, we hope that everyone has a great afternoon. Thank you again to the candidates for all of your time, and best wishes to everyone. Don't forget to register and vote on November 8th. Thank you and have a good afternoon.